Hello everybody. Welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we'll be discussing the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 4th February 2020. Topics to be discussed are displayed on the screen and timestamping for the same are given in the description box below. So let's start. Now this article appears on page number 10 and relates to the recent budgetary push to strengthen the district hospitals in India. Now, accordingly, this topic becomes important from the perspective of General Studies Paper 2 under the subsection Issues Related to Management of Health in India. Now, as it is well known, universal coverage that entails access to quality healthcare at all levels without putting a financial burden on the population has been set as a universal goal across the world. However, according to data published by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, the out-of-pocket expenditure accounts to about 63% of the total health expenditure in India. Now, accordingly, the National Health Policy of 2017 provided for a roadmap for universal health coverage, which includes a robust primary health care, including wellness centers for preventive care, strengthening of district hospitals for multi-speciality care, and ensuring access to free essential drugs and diagnostic services in all government health facilities. Now, the public health system, designed on the basic premise of a robust preventive care, a strengthened network of district hospitals, and free access to drugs and diagnosis, constitutes a roadmap for universal health coverage in India. Now, accordingly, the Niti Aayog has been deliberating on this aspect of strengthening of district hospitals by way of upgrading the district hospitals to medical colleges through a PPP mode. Now, in line with this, the government in the budget 2020-21 has provided for upgradation of district hospitals into medical colleges through PPP mode and viability gap funding by the government. Now, as a part of this news analysis, I'll be discussing the need for strengthening the district hospitals, the basic model that is proposed by the Niti Aayog for upgradation of district hospitals to medical colleges, some of the concerns that have been raised with regard to this step as discussed in this article, and the way forward to upgrade the district hospital network in India that is an integral part of roadmap to universal health coverage in the 21st century. So let's take up these issues one by one. Now, as I have mentioned, the budgetary push for upgrading the district hospitals is in accordance with the Niti Aayog's scheme of linking the private medical colleges to district hospitals. Now, while setting up of medical colleges is set to increase the doctor-patient ratio in India, the public-private partnership mode will ensure that the privatized district hospitals will be empaneled under the PM Jan Arogya Yojana under Ayushman Bharat, and a part of the facilities will be market-driven. Now, though the details of the schemes is yet to be notified, the Niti Aayog scheme envisages the private district hospitals to constitute a minimum of 750 beds from the current level of about 150 to 200 in various district hospitals of India. Now, further, 50% of these beds will be regulated in that they will be empaneled under the Ayushman Bharat scheme, and the rest 50% will be left to the market forces. Now, besides, the cost that is incurred on the private player on account of regulated beds under PMJAY will be fulfilled through the viability gap funding. Now, besides, as per the budget speech, this model will be implemented in a phased manner, in that the first phase will cover the aspirational districts which currently lack in multi-speciality care. Now, as to the need for upgradation of district hospital network in India, as we have discussed, the National Health Policy of 2017 emphasizes on upgradation of district hospitals in order to provide for affordable multi-speciality care to reduce the out-of-pocket expenditure in India. Now, besides, India lacks in multi-speciality care as a result of low number of district hospitals in a number of states, in that there are only about 604 district hospitals across 650 plus districts in India. Now, as a result, secondary and tertiary care is virtually absent in most of the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, which leads to overcrowding of district hospitals in tier 1 cities and other corporate hospitals. Now, this overcrowding of district hospitals in tier 1 cities and corporate hospitals has been one of the main factors in the high out-of-pocket expenditure incurred in India. Now, besides, according to the 71st National Sample Survey, out of the total hospitalization cases in rural areas, there was a strong preference for private sector in that about 58% of the hospitalizations were made in private sector. Now, besides, in urban areas, the preference for private sector was about 68%, which shows a lack of trust in the public sector, particularly in secondary and tertiary care. Now, besides, prior to the launch of Ayushman Bharat, the public funded insurance coverage in India was about 12 to 13%, and thus such a model based on public-private partnership would not have worked. Now, however, with the launch of Ayushman Bharat, a number of private hospitals have been empaneled for tertiary and secondary care, and thus privatizing these district hospitals will complement the insurance component of Ayushman Bharat that is set to increase the insurance penetration in India. Now, besides, as against the WHO's recommendation of 1:1000 doctor-patient ratio, India's doctor-patient ratio is extremely low at 1:1596, which necessitates the deepening of medical education space in India. Now, as a result, linking of private medical colleges to district hospitals will increase the number of doctors and thereby increase the doctor-patient ratio in India. Now, besides, with more number of medical colleges, the cost of medical education in general is set to reduce with the upgradation of district hospitals into medical colleges. Now, in addition, according to India's state-level disease burden report of 2016, the contribution of non-communicable diseases to the disability-adjusted lost years, in short, DALYs, accounts to about 55%. Now, with growing incidence of non-communicable diseases, there is an increasing need felt for care delivery, which the current district hospitals run by public sector are not capable of delivering. As a result, incentivizing the private sector to provide for care delivery was envisaged under the National Health Policy of 2017, and thus privatizing the district hospitals is in line with the change in epidemiological transition that is occurring in India. Now, besides, the district hospitals run by the public sector is marred with low utilization of public fund. For instance, in the year 2016-17, Bihar utilized only about 54% of the budgetary funds that was allocated to it. Now, thus, lack of accountability and low utilization has necessitated the privatization of district hospitals to bring in the efficiency of market forces, thereby increasing access to secondary and tertiary care in India as a whole. Now, in summary, upgrading this district hospital was required in order to increase the access to secondary and tertiary care. Now, this is in line with the increased insurance penetration as a result of the launch of Ayushman Bharat. Now, besides, upgrading the district hospitals to medical colleges will increase the much needed doctor to patient ratio in India. Now, in addition, the move is in line with the changing times in which India is undergoing an epidemiological transition, basically dominated by non-communicable diseases that requires care delivery. Now, with increasing access supported by the public funded insurance, the out-of-pocket expenditure in the secondary and tertiary care is set to decrease, and thus will act as a catalyst for universal health coverage in India. Now, having understood the model of privatization of district hospitals and the need for the same, let us understand some of the concerns that have been raised in general. Now, I would like to highlight here that the concerns that are listed here are compiled from various sources, and this article primarily flags two of these concerns, including neglect of primary health and low spending on public health in this budget in general. Now, first among the concern is that there are a number of states, particularly in southern part of India, like Tamil Nadu, in which every district has a district hospital. Thus, in such states, this model of privatizing the district hospital is not suitable, as the present network of district hospital is already playing an important role in the tertiary care. Now, besides lack of standardization of treatments and cost associated with the treatments and information asymmetry, particularly on the costs between public and private sector, has led to monopoly in the private sector in general and thereby the exorbitant treatment costs in case of tertiary care. Now, as a result, a section of intelligentsia has flagged this concern that without standardization of treatments and costs, the privatization of district hospitals will again lead to monopolization of tertiary care and thus exorbitant costs. Now, further, the viability gap funding from the government is said to be funded by a cess that is introduced in this budget on the medical devices. Now, as a result, in order to garner more funds under the viability gap funding, there are apprehensions that the medical devices may be inappropriately prescribed, leading to its overuse. Now, besides, as highlighted in this article, the budget as a whole has neglected the primary health, which constitutes a major part of a robust public health system. Now, the national health policy also envisages that 2/3 of the resources of a public health system should be dedicated towards preventive care, including the primary health care, and this has been neglected in this budget. Now, besides, as you must be aware, the total health expenditure in India is about 1.3% of the GDP, which is to be raised to about 2.5% by 2025 in accordance with the National Health Policy of 2017. Now, however, with a marginal increase of 8% in the allocation towards health sector in this current budget is considered to be too low in order to translate the low levels of public health spending in accordance with the National Health Policy. Now, thus, the author in this article flags these two issues and admits that undue attention has been given to privatizing the district hospitals, neglecting the primary health care. Now, in addition, while the upgradation of district hospitals to medical colleges is a good step to increase the doctor to patient ratio, there is a severe shortage of teaching personnel in medical education, and thus this step of upgrading the district hospitals to medical colleges is bound to fail. Now, as a way forward, in order for privatization of district hospitals to work, the first step is to standardize the treatment and costs in order to avoid monopolization and high costs of tertiary care. Now, accordingly, the joint working group that was constituted for better implementation of Ayushman Bharat has recommended a framework for standardization of treatment and costs. Thus, this step, recommended by the joint working group of IRDA and National Health Authority, will complement the privatization of district hospitals. Now, in addition, as highlighted by the National Health Policy of 2017, preventive care driven by primary health care should receive maximum attention for a robust public health system, and therefore the budget should have increased the spending on primary health care. Now, in addition, in accordance with the National Health Account published by Ministry of Health, about 42% of the out-of-pocket expenditure is on account of medicines in India. Thus, a push towards free essential medicines and diagnostics is necessary for the success of this model, and thus, if you observe, the budget has given impetus on Jan Aushadhi Kendras. Now, besides, as I have discussed, there is a severe shortage of teaching personnel in medical education space, and thus the upgradation of district hospitals to private medical colleges requires an upgradation of teaching ecosystem in medical education space. Now, this topic becomes extremely important from the perspective of mains examination, where you can use the framework that we have discussed as a ready reckoner for questions related to management of health in India. Now, with this, let's move to the next news. Now, this article appears on page number 10 and relates to the nature of Indian federalism. Now, this lead article attempts to provide an assessment of the nature of Indian federalism in the context of the opposition by states to the recent National Population Register in the backdrop of dissent that is expressed towards the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019. Now, as you must be aware, recently the Union Cabinet has given its nod for the updation of National Population Register across the country. Now, given that the National Population Register is seen as the first step towards compilation of the National Register of Indian Citizens and the recent passing of Citizenship Amendment Act, this move of the centre has invoked serious dissent across the country. Now, in the backdrop of widespread dissent, a number of states have objected to the enumeration of National Population Register and the consequent compilation of National Register of Indian Citizens. Now, given that the matter of citizenship is enumerated in the List 1, Entry 70 of the 7th Schedule, Centre is well within its right to invoke Article 355 and 356 to ensure that the government of every state is carried on in accordance with the provision of this constitution. Now, it should be noted that in the aftermath of independence, the founding fathers of the constitution adopted a quasi-federal constitution for India. Now, the quasi-federation that was envisaged by the constitution makers tilted in favor of the centre, given that the national integration was one of the primary goals of India in the aftermath of the horrors of partition. Now, however, given the success of Indian Federation for 70 plus years, it is increasingly being felt that the nature of Indian federalism should be a cooperative federalism in its spirit. Now, accordingly, the authors in this article concede that the centre is well within its rights to ensure that the states that have objected to NPR or NRC can be held down to constitution under Article 355 and 356. But given the nature of the disagreement between centre and state, India should rethink and set some new conventions in order to make Indian federalism a cooperative federalism. Now, before we discuss the arguments that are put forth in this article, I would like to reiterate that the issue related to NPR, NRC and Citizenship Amendment Act was covered by Nawat sir on 22nd December 2019. So I would suggest you to go through the same for understanding the background of this issue. As a part of this news analysis, we will be discussing the need for reassessment of Indian federalism to instill the spirit of cooperative federalism in situations such as this. Now, before we understand the issue that is flagged by the authors in this article, let us understand the meaning of spirit of cooperative federalism. Now, a cooperative federalism is said to exist in spirit when both the federal units and the centre are entitled to deference from each other or respect from each other by virtue of their independent constitutional existence. Now, this also means that if one does not recognize the independent constitutional existence of the other, there should be a mechanism where the former should be able to enforce this deference on the latter. Now, for instance, if the states fail to enforce the central laws, the centre can hold down the states to follow the constitution. Now, these provisions, as you must be aware, is explicitly provided under Article 355 and Article 356. Now, accordingly, since the matters related to citizenship falls under the union list, the centre in this case is entitled for deference or respect from states by virtue of the constitutional position of the centre with respect to 7th schedule. Now, as a result, going by this argument, the states are bound to show respect or deference towards centre by virtue of the position of centre under 7th schedule. Now, further, if the states do not show deference towards the center in matters related to citizenship. In other words, if the states do not implement the NPR, NRIC, or the Citizenship Amendment Act, there is a mechanism under which the center can hold the states down to the Constitution through Article 355 and 356. So, therefore, it can be said that there is an explicit mechanism in the Constitution to ensure that the states show deference to the center. Now, similarly, under 7th schedule, the states have an independent constitutional duty to enforce law and order, in that the entry 1 of list 2 constitutes public order. Now, in case of NPR NRC issue, the states that are opposing the implementation are doing so on account of widespread dissent that is present across the country, which may pose a challenge to public order. Now, as a result, by virtue of its position in the 7th schedule, the states is well within its right and they have a constitutional duty to enforce public order, and the center should show deference or respect to this constitutional provision of the states. Now, however, what is interesting here is that while the center has explicit provisions to bring down states to follow the constitution, the states do not have a similar mechanism through which it can ensure the deference or the respect to the center to its independent constitutional position. Now, as a result, it can be concluded that the Indian federalism, while provides for a mechanism for center to bring down states on the constitution, the states do not have a similar mechanism, and therefore the spirit of cooperative federalism, according to this definition, is not explicitly provided for in the constitution. Now, as I have already mentioned, this was quite natural at the time when the constitution was framed due to the presence of fissiparous tendencies at the eve of partition and independence. Now, however, with more than 70 years of Indian federal journey, it is time that the spirit of cooperative federalism is instilled in the nature of Indian federalism, which requires new conventions under which the states which have an independent constitutional authority should be able to enforce the deference from the center that is conspicuously missing. Now, as a result, the authors in this article endorse for a reassessment of the nature of Indian federalism, requiring new conventions to instill the true spirit of cooperative federalism. Now, while it is common to hear arguments related to the center's exclusive power in matters of citizenship, and thus it is well within its right to enforce the states to implement the related laws, this issue also invigorates a debate on Indian federalism where conspicuously there is an absence of the spirit of cooperative federalism, in that the states do not have an explicit mechanism to bring down center to follow the constitution, as we have seen here. Now, this discussion should give you a framework to approach the issue in a balanced manner that is much needed, without having value-loaded opinion on this contentious issue of enumeration of NPR and the consequent compilation of NRIC. Now, with this, let's move to the next news. Now, this article appears on page number 7 and relates to the spread of locust swarms to Punjab. Now, this topic becomes important mainly from the perspective of prelims examination under environment, ecology and biodiversity. Now, in the backdrop of the spread of locust swarms to northern Gujarat and Rajasthan, we had covered this topic, including the basics of locusts and the mitigation strategy, in our DNS analysis dated 27th December 2019. Now, what I will do here is attach a part of that video in order for us to revise the related concepts. Now, in this news analysis, let us have a look at what are locusts, the threat that these locusts pose, and some of the steps that can be taken in order to control these locust attacks. Now, locusts are basically a species of short-horned grasshoppers that are polyphagous, which means it feeds on a large variety of plants, leaves, flowers, fruits, etc., and therefore pose a threat of crop damage wherever they move in swarms. Now, in fact, a small swarm of a desert locust is observed to eat on an average as much food in one day as about 10 elephants, 25 camels, or 2500 humans. Besides, the desert locust activity peaks between May and November, which generally coincides with the monsoon season in Rajasthan and Gujarat. Now, it should be noted that the swarms of locusts basically originate in the Arabian Peninsula, as we can see in this map, and travel through Saudi Arabia, Iran, enter Pakistan through to Rajasthan and northern Gujarat. Now, since these locusts are polyphagous in nature, they feed on a large variety of plants, thereby causing crop damage. Now, besides, since these locusts also move in swarms, they destroy the plant by their sheer weight as they descend on them in massive numbers. Now, besides, these locust attacks or locust plagues are not uncommon to India and is said to have led to crop damages to the tune of more than 10 crores during 1926-31 plague cycle, about 2 crores during 1940-46 and 49-55 plague cycles, and the last of the plague cycles occurred in 1959 to 1962. Now, the current attack of locust swarms is feared to destroy mustard, cumin, wheat, jatropha, cotton and potato in the northern Gujarat districts. Now, besides, if the locust numbers have crossed the threshold of 10,000 adults per hectare, it requires attention. Now, coming to the steps that are to be taken in order to control the locust attacks include some of the primitive methods including beating drums, spraying kerosene, fire and smoke. Besides, the government has also formed a number of locust control teams in order to conduct surveys. Now, under pesticide management, tractor mounted sprayers are currently being used to fight the locust control using pesticide malathion. In addition, the farmers are being advised to dig trenches in order to save their crops from these locust attacks. Now, it is also seen that the locust attack can be controlled by use of nitrogen rich fertilizers because the swarming of the locust is inhibited by protein rich plants which are rich in nitrogen. Now, this topic is important particularly from a prelims perspective, especially the details about locust and steps to control them. Now, with this, let's move to the next news. Now, this news appears on page number 1 and relates to the novel coronavirus outbreak in the state of Kerala. Now, in the backdrop of the third confirmed case, the state of Kerala has declared the outbreak of novel coronavirus a state calamity. Now, while the basics of coronavirus has been covered as a part of DNS analysis of 19th January 2020 by Vaibhav sir, as a part of this news analysis, we will focus on what constitutes a state calamity. Now, accordingly, this topic becomes important from the perspective of General Studies Paper 3 under Disaster and Disaster Management. Now, it should be noted that the Section 48 of the Disaster Management Act of 2005 provides for a constitution of a State Disaster Response Fund. Now, the State Disaster Response Fund is the primary fund available for state governments in cases of notified disasters. Now, in addition, the Disaster Management Act also provides for a National Disaster Response Fund that supplements the State Disaster Response Fund in the event of a disaster. Now, it is important to note here that the funds from both State Disaster Response Fund and National Disaster Response Fund can be utilized only in case of occurrence of disaster that are notified in the Act, which includes cyclone, drought, earthquake, fire, flood, tsunami, hailstorm, landslide, avalanche, cloudburst, pest attack, frost, and cold waves. Now, in addition, it should also be noted that both these funds are exclusively used for relief and rehabilitation during and the aftermath of these notified disasters. Now, in addition, the State Disaster Response Fund has a 90% contribution from the central government and 10% from the state government. And as the name suggests, the National Disaster Response Fund, which is a fund over and above the State Disaster Response Fund, is totally contributed by the central government. Now, in addition, a state government, in cases of certain local disaster that are not included in the notified list of disasters, may declare certain categories of disasters as a state calamity with the approval of state executive authority. Now, once a disaster is declared a state calamity, the state is eligible to utilize 10% from the State Disaster Response Fund, and accordingly, the management of novel coronavirus outbreak can be funded up to 10% of the State Disaster Response Fund. Now, with this, let's take up the practice questions. Now, this question is based on this news that appears on page number 13 that relates to India's humanitarian flood relief operation to Madagascar Island, which is called as Operation Vanilla. Now, it should be noted that the coast of Madagascar was hit by Cyclone Diane, and India, that aspires to be the net security provider in the Indian Ocean region, was the first to extend flood relief on board INS Airavat. Now, in addition, this mission is in line with the Sagar initiative that was launched in 2015 that envisions the principle of security and growth for all in the region. Besides, an important fact from the perspective of prelims examination include recently the islands of Madagascar, Comoros, and French island of Reunion were included as a part of Indian Ocean region and collectively are called as Vanilla Islands. Now, accordingly, this question reads, which of the following constitutes Vanilla Islands that is often seen in news? Maldives, Madagascar, Seychelles, which is incorrect. Reunion, Comoros, Madagascar, which is correct, and hence B is the right option. Now, this question is framed on the basis of this news that appears on page number 9 that relates to a draft notification that was published by Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change prohibiting the use of an RO water purification system given that the water meets the BIS standards of drinking water norms. Now, it should be noted that the MOEF has come up with a draft notification as directed by the National Green Tribunal to restrict the use of RO systems. Now, the restriction over use of RO technology is mainly on account of 1. They waste water during purification, 2. They deprive the drinking water of essential salts, and 3. The RO systems do not primarily tackle bacterial agents, and hence NGT has put a restriction on their use given that the tap water meets the BIS drinking water norms. Now, accordingly, this question reads, consider the following with respect to RO systems. 1. They amount to wastage of water during purification, which is correct. They deprive drinking water of essential salts, which is also correct, and hence the right option is C, both 1 and 2. With this, we come to the end of today's discussion. Now let's take up the question for the day. Now the question for the day reads, with reference to Purchasing Managers Index, consider the following statements. 1. It tracks the manufacturing activity in both private and public sector. 2. A reading above 50 denotes expansion, while the reading below 50 denotes contraction. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? A. 1 only, B. 2 only, C. 1 and 2, D. Neither 1 nor 2.